Okay, and hi everyone, I'm back with another feature. Today I am focused here in this Eurorack series going modular on the idea of starting from scratch. And so what I want to take you through is just a bit of my process in terms of thinking about that initial stage of having a blank canvas with my Eurorack system and moving into some new uncharted territory. A couple things to mention here is recently I redid my whole case. I basically put most of my clock sources here, my envelope generators, VCAs, mixer, and then I try to do all my sound sources on the bottom. Two new ones. I've been buying and selling some stuff on reverb.com, so I have this new shard module I'll take you through in a later video for drones, and actually maybe it will come up in this video, we'll have to see. But one of the main modules I want to use is down here, and that is the smaller version of the mutable elements, which is a really amazing sound generator, resonator, multi-useful device. And this particular one is, I believe, only 14 HP, and I think the original is about double of that, 28, so I'm basically saving half of the space. Now, one disadvantage of that is just simply that the knobs on it are not as nice, and the overall design I don't think is as nice as the actual original of by Mutable. So I'll use that as a sound source, and I'm going to start actually with, I decided here with using the CARP module, which is a cool carpless strong module that I think has some interesting tones to it. Originally though, I was starting to lean like maybe I would sell this module, and I do have a video. It'll be either a future video or a previous one depending on what order you watch these in terms of talking about buying and selling, and specifically losing a module, bringing a new module in. I think it's always a challenge with any Eurorack system is to think about exactly what are you doing at any given time. What do you want to do if you're using your case or cases, as I have here, for a performance? It's a much different approach, say, than doing like what I do, which is a lot of studio recording. I never really take this gear out. I do a lot of playing jazz with my MIDI wind instruments, electronic wind instruments. I rarely use these except in my home studio. So I think that makes a bit of a difference. But this particular video is called Starting from Scratch, and I really do want to emphasize the idea of just how maybe you begin. Now, of course, for you, getting an initial sound out of a new patch, a blank canvas, it's going to be a lot different because there is so much customization that happens in Eurorack that obviously it's pretty hard to make comparisons. I mean, sometimes what I'll do is I will Google and look for a particular module, and then I'll try to see how the person uses that module. I did that with the shard, the drone generator, before I bought it. But even having two or three of the same modules and using those in tandem based on something you see online, clearly there's just so much variation and ability to change things. And the exponential nature of Eurorack is what I think makes it exciting for many of us. The fact that on any given module, I can have 10 different points in and out. Those could be audio points, those could be control voltage points, modulation sources in and out, and just the smallest tweak of a knob and the addition of another cable here or there, whatever that patch point is, makes so much difference in terms of the sound. And one of the initial things I was thinking about with this is when you start from scratch, if you compare working in a Eurorack environment, in a modular environment, to say the old days of workstations. I remember I had this Yamaha workstation I sold a couple years back, and actually it allowed me to buy some of this equipment we're seeing today. I can't tell you how much I buy and sell on reverb.com, but I remember turning on that workstation, and there were particular like presets, and they sounded very good, but it was one of these where the left hand would play chords and drums, and then the right hand could play a melody part. And it was cool and all, but whenever I interacted with that, I thought, I haven't really done much other than played something harmonically, melodically. I've played some chords on my left hand and a melody part at my right. But in a sense, it starts at a level so above my, say, desire to create something. What I like about Eurorack is that it's all customization. So I decide on the modules I want, and then even when I have those modules, I'm thinking about changing my case up. I'm thinking about, as I said with the carp, maybe I'm a little bored with this and I'll sell it. I recently sold one of my two. I had 3 muskrat modules. I sold one. Thank you to whoever bought that on Reverb. And I did that because I was just getting bored with having similar sounding modules, even though initially my thought was I was going to use those, if you watch my drum video, as different tones for drums. So I think that's cool about Eurorack, is that you sort of get this sense of nervousness about maybe this particular module isn't working, I'm going to sell it, I'm going to bring something else in, and so forth. And I think it's a generative kind of process when you get involved in the world of Eurorack. So this started off with just a goal of trying to look at this module here, the carp, to see if in combination with some other modules I could get something unique sounding. But to go back to my point about the workstation, what occurs to me with Eurorack is it's really the opposite of what's happening in a workstation. So essentially I'm beginning at a very rudimentary level. I'm going to patch some things out, and I'm going to say I'll begin with a concept I might have about audio, and then I will include in that maybe a concept I might have about some gate or trigger sources, and then I might have a concept about a particular effect I want to use to make my sounds unique or whatever. One of the things I enjoy so much about Eurorack synthesis is that you can really spend a lot of time thinking about timbre, thinking about the quality of the sound at a very minute level, such that one tweak of a dial, one additional patch point will make a world of difference in terms of sound. And I don't think you see that, say, playing a traditional synthesizer, certainly not a workstation. Now you could of course say with many synths out there, particularly semi-modular, it's some of the same process, and that's totally true. But for me, the Eurorack setup allows me such possibility just at this level of the blank slate. So let's start with this, and what I'll do is I just have my mixer set up on, make sure everything is unmuted here. I'm going to do a simple stereo out, so I'm not going to worry too much about getting the panning perfect and so forth. So I think what we'll do here is we'll start with, since I mentioned it, the carp module. So the first thing I'm going to do is take a clock source, and typically I could use my Hermit, which is off screen, it's up here, more powerful sequencer, but I'm really impressed with having these 2 Pico trigger modules. And this has an app that you can load on your phone, and you can change the patterns, but I bought a second one on Reverb because I thought I want to have access to 8 patterns. And by using multiples, I can of course often have more than one of these outs, so it's not necessarily limited to 8 outs, and anytime I can take one of these outs, put it into chance, have more clock sources, put it into my div module, my divider, and really do some interesting rhythmic things. But I like starting with something simple because for an inspiration point, I already have a basic, in this case 4/4 beat, that's playing something very simple. So I will use that as a trigger source into the carp. And then what I'm going to do is take the out of it, and I thought of this recently as well, so I was getting a little bored with the carp. I've so rarely used my Disting MK4, and I just put in the new firmware, 4.13 I believe, and it has this really cool SD card delay. It basically writes your delay audio to the SD card, and you can record up to like as long as you can fit on your card, so it's pretty crazy. But in this particular case, I'm using C5, and I don't have my manual with me right now. I think that is the wave folder. Sorry, totally take that back. I just peeked at the manual on the computer. It is the resonator. So it actually is doing something very similar to my clone of Elements. And actually not knowing what and I think I got it right, X is the input here. So basically the disting has an X and Y, which very typically are inputs, and the A and B are the outputs. But one of the things I find frustrating about the disting is that it really is the Swiss Army knife of Eurorack modules, in the sense that it does just about everything. It does effects, it does all kinds of cool clock and slew sources and LFOs and delayed LFOs. I mean, there's nothing really that it can't do. The challenge is, and it's super small, it's well built, but the challenge is it is very hard. It's like the most menu diving I can imagine in any Eurorack module. You compare that to some of my other modules, like the radar, the erogenous tones. I mean, it really is actually, this is pretty complex too, but it's more based on, you know, turning knobs, potentiometers, and having fun with that. The tip-top fold processor over here, and I realize you can't see these directly, but I think if you might be familiar with some of these modules. Same thing, right? There's a lot I'm doing on the surface, and I don't have the option to do any menu diving. So for me, the MK4 is a great place to start, because you can really go through all the algorithms, over 80 of those, and say, okay, do I want to start with an effect? Do I want to do an interesting clock source? Maybe I'll do a LFO of some sort, a rectifier. In this case, I thought, let me try a resonator. So the first thing that's happening here is that this essentially is going to take this sound and augment it. And maybe what I'll do here, okay, so you're basically just hearing the dry signal from the carp. And you're hearing a bit of a harmonic there as well. And one of the things when I'm doing this actually I'm going to route through a couple of effects. I have off screen the Ventris reverb, and I can just hit that for you now to hear. This is on the Modverb, to hear what that's going to sound like. You can go back to dry again, but I think one of the things that's always challenging beginning with a sound, and again, I think it's a good idea to begin with a very simple rhythmic source for your clock. In this case, I just want to hear the tonal qualities of the module. Now I could real quick just excuse all the clicks here. You can hear maybe the difference of just the pure sound before I put it into the resonator. So to me it sounds a little thin. And so I'm just adjusting the gain on this particular module. One of the things we can do is the beat output on this one. These are all customized to the patch, to the algorithm. I believe in this case it's giving me the envelope from the audio in, and then I can just actually put that into another one of my patch points into the carp. And so for me, it's really a lot of trial and error to see if sonically, and you can see sometimes just starting off with a patch, you get some really unpleasant sounds in your mix. But for me, it's starting off to see, can I get something interesting going on in terms of timbre, in terms of sound. Just patching that out into the carp, I didn't find anything, so maybe I could use I could use the Y input here, which is going to affect the pitch of the resonator. And to do that, maybe I'll just take it off camera here, sample and hold module from my random module. And I can adjust the rate, so you're going to hear it slow down. One of the cool things is, I don't even have this clocked. I could do the clock in from this module into the Pico random, but sometimes you can just dial things in with your ear. I do that with my div module a lot, where I just keep adjusting the tempo, the rate, whatever your knob is, until I hit a sweet spot. And in this case, I'm getting some squelchy, interesting, rhythmic situations. And so I could further add to that, right? I've almost used up everything. I could go, I guess, go to the ZN on my disting algorithm, but I've used up almost everything there. I could work with the carp and add some things with my inputs. I could change the waveform. I could alter some of the other parameters just with our knobs. Getting more squelchy, lower sound there. And then that high-pitched bell-like sound is being produced by the frequency input in the sample and hold from the Pico. Now, I have something I think that I like a little bit, so maybe I'll just turn on my Ventris reverb and see how different it sounds with some verb or just hearing the dry signal. What I was doing there, it's off screen, you can't see it, but I have this on the Modverb, or no, I'm sorry, it's the Lo-Fi, which is a really cool reverb. Again, the Ventris is stereo, so one of the things I always like with Eurorack is the potential to take a mono signal, like in this case, and make it stereo. And there are a lot of other ways to do that, of course, with modules. There's so many opportunities with filter modules and output modules, and even some of the new semi-modular synths out there. The new Matriarch synthesizer, as an example, has stereo delay, stereo filters, outs, and so you could think about using your Eurorack in combination with other stereo gear. The Ventris essentially does that for me, which is cool. Now, I'm still back to thinking I'm not quite done with this, so let's turn off the reverb. We have our dry again. And again, I think what's cool about working on patches is to sometimes add and subtract things, which of course you know is like the difference between, say, West and East Coast synthesis in terms of subtractive or additive synthesis. In this case, though, I'm more talking about adding elements and seeing, or taking away elements and seeing how those maybe change the timbre of the sound. For me, again, I'm really stressing in this video that timbre, the quality of sound, is what I really love the most about Eurorack, particularly at this level of starting from scratch. So what I thought I would do is, I kind of like this sound, but let me take the out of there, and let's put it into my wave folder. And as you might guess, what I'm going to simply do is take the output from the disting, and this is the tip-top fold processor, and I'll put it into one channel. And I think you're noticing already, and what I love about the fold processor is has the potential to do really interesting textural things to your sounds. I can do something quite minimal, If I turn it the opposite way, I'll get some harshness. So what I'm doing is I'm taking my one module, the carp, which I said I was a little bored with, and I'm taking sonically the output, putting into one module, changing it with the resonator patch, and then doing a second version of that with the fold processor. So at each level, what I'm doing is building on, or in some cases taking away from, what I did before. Now, to add to that, we have our new sound here, the fold processor sound. Let's throw it into the wet reverb. Again, it's the Ventris Lo-Fi reverb, and we'll alter some parameters here and see how it changes. And maybe one other thing I'll do, just for the heck of it, I don't know how it's going to work, but I'll take an envelope out. I love using an envelope or another opportunity. It's not in my case right now, but my Make Noise Maths is a great game changer in this sense. I just love taking an envelope and tweaking it and using that, in this case, for the Fold CV to see what we can do. So I'm going to flip the reverb back on, and then you'll hear some differences, and then we'll experiment with our envelope. So here's the reverb. And I mean, I don't know what you think of that. Again, what's cool about Eurorack is just the level of experimentation. You often feel when you're just playing around with your system that there aren't any rules. Now, for someone not doing, if you've heard my stuff online, I definitely focus on experimental stuff. Right now, I'm really getting into more ambient, dark experimental. I have a new toy coming in a little bit, and I'll do a video on that once it arrives. It's a new Folk-Tech device, which will, I think, go along nicely with my delay unit, the conduit. But what I wanted to mention about this is, again, I can come up with something sonically interesting. Whether I'll use that in a track, whether I'll use it in a composition or something remains to be seen. But what I love about Eurorack is that just that ability to experiment without really a regard for the rules in terms of composition or what something has to sound like. Now, I think what you heard happen here was that we got some audio rate modulation from the envelope generator. And again, I don't know if it was interesting. What I did was I reduced with the attenuator the amount of fold CV that was being affected here, so I could dial down some of that harshness and also adjust the curves there. And then I started just dialing in some things here in terms of two of the parameters to get a different sonic thing going on. So I think, you know, if I'm doing a composition or something, this is a first building block, and I've only used 2 channels in my mixer. Again, everything going through the Ventris dual reverb. I want to do something though with the resonator, with the, again, I keep calling them mutable elements. Essentially, it's the clone version of that. It's in much smaller space, and I've been really excited about this module, using it. So I think what we'll do then is, why don't we move the light there a little bit? That looks pretty good. What I wanted to do is just move the camera here so you could see the next element that I'm working on. And I think we'll turn down the mixer channels of the first sound. And what I'm going to do here, I'll just start with dry. I'm not going to do this in stereo. It does have dual outs, but I'm just going to take the output here, and we'll start with our simple trigger that I love to do from the Pico, and this is just going to trigger the sound. Actually, on my mixer, just adjusted the gain. One of the things you probably realize with Eurorack is that sometimes different modules, you'll have some hot or less than hot outputs. So it just sometimes happens, so I adjusted on the mixer, and I may have to go back later, depending on what I do in this patch, to further hone it in. So again, I have a very simple clock coming in, and I have the alternative firmware in here, so just on its own I can get some very cool textures without doing a heck of a lot. And just right here, if you listen to this, subtle movement, just listen to how different. That's, I believe, the below switch on this. To me, I love modules like this where I have a lot of controls, and any one of those controls will give me potentially just a radical and dramatic alteration of the sound. And I haven't really patched anything in. So for me, the physical modeling synthesis that you see actually in a lot of my modules, I can't tell you how many, but quite a few, it's just a great place for me to begin. I just love the characteristic of the sound. So I just have the simple output here. What I want to do though is I think I want to take this into my delay, which is the Folktech conduit. Again, I wouldn't normally do it this way, but we're going to just directly patch like this. You'll hear all the clicks as we do it. This is a demo video. Just taking the out into the delay in. This is another module recently I've discovered, just has so much versatility to it. I can take 3 different outs from the Vactrals, the delay, the filter. In this case, I'm just using the delay in and out. And the way I have this patched up with my patch board here is there's not going to be a lot of effects from the Vactrals on the resist module, but very cool if I want to do that in a future patch. So I can dial back the feedback or the delay time. I have the mix almost at 100%, so we're getting the totally wet signal. I always like, in a situation like this, I had a very cool sound here, but what you hear is my filter. So kind of like what I did with my previous patch using the CARP, I, again, am beginning a simple trigger source. I'm activating this module. I haven't even used the exciter or resonator in, which can really get interesting and cool. And I just thought I wanted to take advantage of the cool sounding delay and the filter on the conduit. So like I did with the previous process, started with my dry signal, dialed it in here just in terms of the filter sound. I kind of wanted maybe a little more trebly sound to contrast with the big reverb from the carb. I arrive at that. It's not terribly exciting or interesting, but it's, you know, a good point for me to begin with in terms of just thinking about possibility for that next track or whatever I'm trying to create. Now I'm going to do my trick again. I'll take envelope from radar, and I think we'll go into the FM mod. Let's try that. Got some distortion there. I didn't really enjoy that too much. I could go into the position. So I'm noticing I'm having trouble just distinguishing how I'm changing the sound here, so I might want to go back to my dry signal. And then I can really dial some stuff in here. So this is kind of actually replicating a typical process for me. I'm actually at a point where I'm thinking the previous sound I had was better or more interesting. And so nothing I'm really doing with my inputs here is amounting to much. And I think that's a common experience with Euro Rack. So this is a good demonstration maybe in that sense. I could try a different clock source. And I think you're always forced when you are working with a module that has so many parameters to think about the interplay of all the elements, which is one of the coolest things about a lot of Eurorack. And there are some new oscillators coming out now recently I saw where there really is interplay between the various oscillators and elements. Okay, so that is actually interesting. So I've been just playing and playing here, and I thought maybe I'll take the damp input and take my random out, my pico, which isn't clocked right now. And again, that could be an advantage. I think if you look at a lot of Euro-rack synthesis, you know, you don't necessarily always have to have everything clocked together. If you saw the new Pulsar 23, Vlad's latest drum machine, if you can call that invention, from Soma Synths, there's a lot of like aleatoric, unsynced elements to it. And one of the things I like about that drum machine, if you can call it that, is that often you're not able to control the timing of the various elements, and thus maybe you have to rely on your ear or really think about your musical composition in a new way. So I'm going to take this unsynced clock source, it's just the pulse out from the pico random, and put it into the damp in and see what we get happening rhythmically and like texturally or timbrally. Immediately, I think what it does for me, it's adding almost like some velocity punches, some accents to the sound. So I particularly like that. I could tweak some more parameters. Now, of course, there's always a danger you do that and you lose what you've done. So I think I'll leave it for now. Now, let's go back into the delay input to see if we still get the same effect that we had before. You recall we had this going into the folk tech to hear what we get here. So I kind of like that. It's not anywhere near what it was like here, right? With that filter, we're getting just a lot of alterations of the frequency of the sound. So in some ways I liked it better here, its punchiness, but this also has, I think, a pretty gothic, ethereal, ambient quality to it. I could take it and further work with my effects chain. You won't see it, it's off screen here, but I will take out of the folk tech and we'll just chain it into the 2HP verb. I don't know what the setting is, but we'll try it out. Let's see. Yeah, I like that. So this wasn't totally doing it for me. I think some of the harmonics I lost, or the frequencies I lost with the delay when I put it into the 2HP verb, something shifted in terms of the sound. And so I think that is much more interesting just in terms of something that maybe I can work with. I was thinking too, I could further alter the sound here if I wanted to. So I don't know, I sometimes like taking the pitch input or the volt per octave input and doing something with it, trying to decide what I want to do. So almost thinking of taking the envelope output from the disting. You could try it again, there aren't any rules. If it totally sucks, we just take the patch cable out and start over. kind of like that. There's a squelchiness. Sometimes I find that the Elements module is on the verge of like peaking or just falling out of control sonically. I'm getting that sense now. Adjust the reverb. The filter on the delay. Yeah, so that's pretty cool. Again, just thought I've got this output here from the disting algorithm I'm not using. Throw it in there. Can you call it a clock source? I mean, I guess. It's really just tracking this into the pitch, into the elements. Then I could have used a variety of different sources, but that one I'm thinking could work for me because this is going to be the same rhythm as what's happening with the carp. Recall we've got a sample and hold in here, the carp, the trigger, and then we're going through basically this resonator and then this wave folder. So in a sense there could be a symmetry between these 2 points here, right? Just because I'm taking advantage of having a second output that is replicating the audio signal that is going into here or coming out of here. Okay, and I think we'll leave that. I think that's sounding interesting. You know, again, it's sounding like something I could work with for a future composition. So now the question is, shall we bring in our 2 channels? And I'm almost forgetting, I don't know if you do this as well, but it's like, wait, what was I working on here? And that's one of the cool things about Eurorec is that I started with my first element, I added a second one. There's some symmetry happening in this patch, I believe, because of the sharing of 2 different sources from the Pico Random that is triggering this module. So I'm thinking there's going to be some sonic symmetry when I bring up the initial track, which again is our carp, going through resonator, disting 4, and then the tip-top fold processor. So let's bring up that audio. I'm just trying to listen to the mix, and I think what's happening is because I'm not being too careful about my panning, I'm not getting the ideal mix in terms of just that second sound. But you're hearing, I believe, both of those, hearing both those patches. So we'll try one more thing now. And I'm trying this because I thought it'd be a good opportunity to use my newest Eurorec module, which is the Shard. And this is a very interesting module, and I'll probably talk about this a little more in the future. But one of the things it does really well is these dense and I think very nice distorted drones. I can also bring an audio in, and I think use this essentially, I'd say, as a quasi distortion effects unit. It does a lot of different things. So what I'm going to do now, I discovered one little trick, and I should bring up the sound of that track. I'm going to use my envelope generator from Radar just to control these pitches. So I'm just trying to tweak some things here, and I'm just discovering that what I really want is some reverb or some effect on this. So we're going to take our, and I could do a lot of this in post-production, but let's take our Pico DSP, which is a multi-effects unit, and we'll just patch something in and see if we can get this to just sound a little more ambient. To me, it needs something more, so let's try and come up with something. Okay. Here's the dry, and here's the wet. Okay, so I dialed in something, not totally satisfied with that. Again, I'm trying to just demo this in the sense of just working through, as honestly as possible, a certain process of creating a patch starting from scratch. So I think I'll do one more thing on this, and I will go into the atrophy CV input, and we're going to use our same favorite Pico random module. We'll take, should we try sine wave? Let's see what it sounds like. Here we go. Random pulse. Noise. Well, so in any case, that's a start. So what I ended up, I tried the remaining outputs from the Pico Random and ended up using the noise output into the atrophy. And I think it has a certain sonic quality to it, right? So this is pretty aleatoric and obviously very experimental, but I think what you begin to see is that when you start working on a patch from scratch, you can just be taken in so many different directions in terms of the sonic, rhythmic, timbral possibilities of your patch. And so for me, what makes Eurorack so exciting is this very possibility. I essentially start from nothing, I build up. It's a lot of trial and error, as I said. I try to take you through this very honestly because I think a lot of the times to get, with any musical composition, to get to the end product, it's a lot of trial and error, experimentation, failures, changes in direction, moments of inspiration, and frankly a little bit of frustration as well along the way. So please check out additional videos in this feature, ongoing feature called Going Modular. As always, please leave some of your comments here on YouTube, and thanks for watching, and I'll check in with you next time here as we look at more excitement that we can all achieve through our own experiments with modular synthesis.